Hello kindly, people of YouTube, Punk Rock Fairy Princess here. So I'm pretty sure we all know why we're here, but for those who are a little bit new to the situation or uncertain as to the specifics, let's recap real quick. J.K. Rowling, best known for writing the Harry Potter series, has over the past couple years received some suspicion and criticism about her views about due to some tweets she's liked, people on Twitter she's followed, and general statements that she's said. While this came more into public consciousness in 2018, there were earlier examples of her views. In her 2015 crime novel, The Silkworm, a trans woman character named Pippa follows and tries to stab the protagonist. When her ID is shown and therefore her trans identity is revealed, her Adam's apple is specifically noted, as well as the way she keeps her hands in her pockets. Then comes this lovely line. "If you go for that door one more time, I'm calling the police, and I'll testify and be glad to watch you go down for attempted murder. And it won't be fun for you, Pippa," he added, "not pre-op." Need I say anything here? So then in 2018, she liked this tweet calling trans women men in dresses, and people got a little more suspicious. Sometime in 2019, GLAAD, the Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation, which is an organization that kind of advocates for the entire LGBT+ community, reached out to her and asked if she wanted to have an off-the-record conversation about trans issues. This offer, she declined. Her views became clear last December when she tweeted out her support for Maya Forstater, whose case I will get to in just a second, saying this: "Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who'll have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for saying that sex is real, #I stand with Maya." So this all came to a head on the 6th when she tweeted a whole tweet thread about it, and then on the 10th she released this piece about her reasons for speaking out about sex and gender issues. Before we really get into this issue, I feel like we need to go into a couple of basics for just a second, just so we're all on the same page. So, sex and gender are two different things. Sex is biological, male, female, and then gender is social, so man, woman, etc. Sometimes these match up. For example, I'm a female and I identify as a woman. Sometimes they don't, so a person who was born male might identify as a woman or as non-binary. Of course, it's not quite as simple as that because sex isn't a binary, it's more like a bimodal distribution, so like not everyone is male or female and things get a little bit, fuzzy in the middle, so you have intersex people, but like, you get the picture. And here is an incomplete list of trusted organizations around the world that state the validity of trans people. So transness is not an illness, and trans people deserve equal rights. The American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, the American Psychoanalytic Association, the Human Rights Campaign, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the American College of Osteopathic Pediatricians, the United Nations, and the United Kingdom's National Health Service, or the NHS. So to begin, I'd like to structure this as though we were giving J.K. Rowling the benefit of the doubt about all the things that she says. As will become clear throughout this video, I don't think we can give her the benefit of the doubt, but that's how we're going to start, because I think a lot of the points that she says are misconceptions that a lot of people have about trans people, because a lot of people are simply not educated on trans issues. So that's kind of what I want this video to be. Like, this is the stuff you might have heard, this is stuff you might believe, and this is how those things are wrong and not backed up by the facts. To begin, J.K. Rowling just seems very misinformed about trans issues. She says things like, "In spite of everything a sexist world tries to throw at the female-bodied, it's fine not to feel pink, frilly, and compliant inside your head. It's okay to feel confused, dark, both sexual and non-sexual, unsure of what or who you are." This is in the context of questioning the identity of trans men, and it's like, trans men aren't trans because they don't like frilly pink things. It's a lot more complicated than that. She also calls women a biological class, which woman is a gender, therefore by definition is not biological. She also doesn't include trans people on her list of most vulnerable people in our society, even though trans people statistically are the most vulnerable people in our society, especially trans women. Transgender women were 72% of all hate violence homicides in 2013, and trans women are 1.8 times more likely to experience sexual violence than other survivors. 51% of trans folks in the States have attempted suicide at least once in their lives. That stat is 50% in Australia and 51% among trans youth in England. And before anyone tries to make the argument that the suicide rate is so high in trans communities because transness is an illness, first of all, like I said, basically every major medical organization disagrees with you. And also, studies show that strong parental support of a trans person's identity reduces the likeliness of suicide from 57% to 4%. And then she writes this sentence. Ironically, radical feminists aren't even trans exclusionary. They include trans men in their feminism because they were born women. Yeah, I'm sure trans men are stoked to be included in your women's spaces, Joanne. I'm sure it's very affirming to them. J.K. Rowling also buys into a lot of the fear-mongering and misleading points that transphobes often make, so let's go over a couple of those. First, we have bathroom fear-mongering. When you throw open the doors of bathrooms and changing rooms to any man who believes or feels he's a woman, and as I've said, gender confirmation certificates may now be granted without any need for surgery or hormones, then you open the door to any and all men who wish to come inside. A study found that the types of crimes that bathroom bills attempt to curb are extremely rare, and that any worries about privacy violations that happen because of non-discrimination laws are not empirically grounded at all. Analysis indicates that there is no empirical evidence to support these concerns. Such crimes and privacy violations are extremely rare. Calls for trans bathroom bills are fear-mongering, plain and simple. There is simply no evidence to show that predators will take advantage of such laws that allow people to use the bathroom that best suits their gender identity. In the US since 2017, there have been 19 states that have allowed people to do so, and there was no spike in bathroom assaults. Maine has had gender identity protections for 11 years, and there hasn't been a single incident. In fact, it's trans people that have to face violence in bathrooms. 70% of trans and gender nonconforming Americans have reported being denied access, being verbally abused, or physically assaulted in bathrooms. Almost 60% of trans people have avoided going to a public bathroom to avoid a confrontation. 32% of trans people have limited what they've ate or drank so they don't have to go to the bathroom. She also, in that quote, mentions gender recognition certificates, and from the way she puts it, she makes it sound like you could just walk in to an office and walk out with a gender recognition certificate, when really it's much more complicated. You have to be above 18, you have to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria, have lived with your acquired gender for 2 years, and intend to live with your acquired gender for the rest of your life. The new Scottish bill, which she mentions elsewhere in the piece, is similar. You have to have lived with your acquired gender for 3 months, then undergo a 3-month reflection period, and then intend to live with your acquired gender for the rest of your life. She also claims that women who want to retain their single-sex spaces are in the vast majority, even though a poll in the US found that 54% of women are fine with having people use the bathroom that best fits their gender identity. Point 2. Detransitioning and desisting. I'm concerned about the huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and also about the increasing numbers who seem to be detransitioning, returning to their original sex, because they regret taking steps that have in some cases altered their bodies irrevocably and taken away their fertility. A study of detransition rates in a UK gender clinic found that out of 3,000 patients, 16, or 0.47%, expressed transition-related regret or had detransitioned. And those who did transition most often was because of physical complications or social complications, and not due to a change in gender identity. And these detransitions were most often temporary. Only 3 patients, 0.001%, had detransitioned long-term. Another study found the most common reason for detransitioning was that the person simply couldn't cope with the family and community support they had lost, as well as experiences with transphobia. Others had difficulty finding housing or finding a job. Transitioning is also shown to have overwhelmingly positive effects. In a massive meta-analysis of 55 studies on the effects of transitioning, 50 studies, or 93% of the studies, found positive effects, and 4 studies, or 7% of the studies, found either mixed or null effects. No study found negative effects. Another meta-analysis found that of the patients who underwent sex reassignment surgery, 80% reported a significant improvement in dysphoria, 78% reported significant improvement in psychological symptoms, and 72% significant improvement in sexual function. J.K. Rowling also states that 60 to 90% of trans kids will grow out of their gender dysphoria. I would like to note that she cites almost nothing in this entire piece, which made it really hard to research and debunk, because I'm just like, where the fuck is she getting all this bogus ass data? I can't debunk it if I can't find it. So the study that I did find, which had similar numbers to this statement she made, was a follow-up study about 127 kids who were referred to and diagnosed with gender dysphoria in a gender clinic in the Netherlands. The major problem with the study is that they assumed that the 80 patients who did not reapply for the next stage in their transition simply didn't have dysphoria anymore, instead of, contacting them and actually getting accurate information. So their conclusion that 64% of the children had desisted, weren't dysphoric anymore, is really, really misleading. When actually, only 22 had desisted, 37% had continued with their transition, and 41% weren't contacted for the study. Most of the other studies that had similar numbers to this were like from the 70s and 80s, which on a topic like trans people is not reliable at all, because it was the 70s and 80s, and also the way they diagnosed gender dysphoria was different back then, so a lot of times like gender non-conforming people were lumped in with the kids who they thought might be gender dysphoric, so they're just totally not reliable stats. If you're interested in more on this specific topic, it's called the desistance myth, and here's this super duper long article that goes over the whole thing. And finally, even if a kid might show signs of being trans and socially transition when they're younger, but then figure out that they're not, I don't really see the issue with that. I mean, if the kid was trans, then you've just saved them a lot of struggle and problems, and if they're not trans, well, then they've figured themselves out. I mean, in that case, it's not like they were going through a phase when they thought they were trans, it's just that they were figuring out what their gender identity was. We all go through stages like that when we're just like, am I this thing? Maybe not. It's just part of the lifelong journey of discovering ourselves. Point 3. Trans people and mental illness. The writings of young trans men reveal a group of notably sensitive and clever people. The more of their accounts of gender dysphoria I've read, with their insightful descriptions of anxiety, dissociation, eating disorders, self-harm, and self-hatred, the more I've wondered whether, if I'd been born 30 years later, I might have tried to transition. The allure of escaping womanhood would have been huge. I struggled with severe OCD as a teenager. If I'd found community and sympathy online that I didn't find in my immediate environment, I believe I could have been persuaded to turn myself into the son my father had openly said he'd have preferred. She goes on to imply that the trans men who have experienced these mental illnesses are trans or were convinced because of their mental illnesses. And she wonders if she, who struggled with OCD as a teenager, could have been convinced to transition, which is just such a colossally dumb take. They aren't trans because they have anxiety or self-hatred. They have those things because they're trans. I'm assuming being trans and in the closet doesn't do well for your self-esteem. Studies do show that trans kids struggle with a lot of mental illnesses, but also that things like depression and anxiety go down once their gender dysphoria is recognized and treated. Other studies show that trans kids who socially transition have levels of depression and anxiety that are close to cis kids. Point 4. Strawmanning trans activists. J.K. Rowling continually strawmans what she calls new trans activists actually advocate for. She claims that trans activists are pushing to erode the legal definition of sex and replace it with gender, which isn't true. They're trans activists are just saying that in social situations, gender is the more relevant one, whereas in medical contexts, for example, sex might be the most relevant one. When people say trans women are women, they're not saying sex isn't real, they're just saying that they're women. Gender? Social situations. Social, biological. I've said this a bunch of times already in this video, but She's also not happy with the inclusive language that calls female people menstruators and people with vulvas, calling that kind of language demeaning and dehumanizing. However, as far as I can tell, these are used in contexts in which those terms are relevant. It's not like we're calling all female people menstruators in all contexts. No, it's just in the context of menstruation. Because, fun fact, some trans men and some non-binary people menstruate. That's just how it works. As for people with vulvas, this can be useful for medical contexts. For example, I googled the phrase people with vulvas, and one of the first things that came up was this article on chlamydia. And it talks about how long chlamydia takes to show up in people with vulvas and people with penises. This is the best way to say this that is both accurate and inclusive. Point 4a, common experiences. J.K. Rowling also asserts that trans activists say that cis women don't have common experiences, and that women must accept and admit that there is no material difference between trans women and themselves. Nobody is saying that cis women don't have common experiences. Of course they do. They deal with a lot of similar stuff. Just like how trans women and cis women sometimes have common experiences. In certain cases, trans women and cis men might have some common experiences. Nobody is saying that trans women and cis women are exactly the same. They're just saying they're both women that happen to have some different experiences. Like, white women and black women and other women of color also all have different experiences. There are differences in experience between straight women and gay women and bi women and pan women. There are differences and similarities in experience. There's no one common experience that defines women. Like, there's not. People have different intersectionality. That is my point. Random side point. J.K. Rowling also doesn't seem to understand how freedom of speech works. She implies that her freedom of speech is being infringed upon by the people who are hating on her for her views on trans people, and it's like, that's not infringing on your freedom of speech, because freedom of speech protects you from the government. So it's not like the UK government is like, J.K. Rowling, delete those tweets. The people who are criticizing J.K. Rowling's takes on trans people are also using their right to freedom of speech. That's how freedom of speech works. You can say stuff, but that doesn't protect you from how people react to the way you say things. If she was such a staunch defender of freedom of speech like she says she is, she should know this. Point 6. Vagueness. One of the major problems with this piece is that she never seems to fully come out and say what she thinks. She's rarely specific about her points. This piece is supposed to be outlining her reasons for being concerned with trans activism, when the whole time she's just so vaguely gesturing at TERF talking points, to the point where I would almost consider it like transphobic dog whistling. In her first reason, she mentions that she has a trust that supports projects for female prisoners and for survivors of domestic and sexual abuse. And it's like, what does that have to do with concerns about trans activism? If this piece was showing support for trans people, then it would make sense, because, like I said before, trans women are more likely to experience sexual violence than cis women. But she's not. So it's like, is she using that age-old stereotype that trans women are just pretending to be trans so that they can attack women in single-sex spaces? Which is such a fucking weird phrase. Is that what she's saying here? We don't know for sure, because she's not coming out and saying it. Her second reason is that she used to be a teacher, and that gives her an interest in both education and safeguarding. Safeguarding against what, Joanne? And says that she has deep concerns about the effect that trans activism is having on both. What concerns, Joanne? What threat do trans people pose to children's education and safeguarding? Again, we know what she means. She's playing into the stereotype that trans women are inherently predatory. Part 2, in which I have more doubt as to what J.K. Rowling's true intentions are with this piece, because she purposefully seems to misrepresent both people, communities, and studies. So, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, one of the main things that kind of outed J.K. Rowling as a transphobe was her support for Maya Forstater. It is possible that she's simply misinformed on this topic, because there was a lot of misinformation surrounding her case. J.K. Rowling claims that Maya was forced out of her job for claiming that sex is real. Now, if you take some time to Google what actually happened, you'll find out that that's not entirely what it was. The company that Maya Forstater had been working for didn't fire her, they just didn't renew her contract when it expired because she'd been harassing and kind of saying some very demeaning things and purposefully misgendering people on Twitter. Forstater took the company to court, and in J.K. Rowling's words, asked the judge to rule on whether a philosophical belief that sex is determined by biology is protected in the law. Except, first of all, I don't think anyone's denying that sex is determined by biology. And second of all, that's not what this case was about at all. The judge on the case ruled that Forstater is absolutist in her view of sex, and it is a core component of her belief that she will refer to a person by the sex she considered appropriate even if it violates their dignity and or creates an intimidating, hostile, degrading, humiliating, or offensive environment. The approach is not worthy of respect in a democratic society. You see, I actually took the time to inform myself, read some articles, and skim the court proceedings and the judgment on the case. And then there's Magdalene Burns. Or Maudlin Burns? I've heard it pronounced Maudlin, which seems weird because there's a G in it, but that's not relevant. Anyway, J.K. Rowling calls her an immensely brave young feminist who was a great believer in the importance of biological sex. Here J.K. Rowling has no excuse to be misinformed because basically all of Burns's content was about trans people and how they aren't real and it's an illness, and sex and gender are the same thing, and trans people are trying to creep on you in the bathroom. She was openly disgusted by trans people and in general just quite hateful. But as we all know, punching down is a very brave and feminist thing to do. Rowling continually misrepresents the gender-critical community. Gender-critical is another word for TERF. She says that a lot of gender-critical people became interested in this issue in the first place out of concern for trans youth. And as we all know, questioning whether trans people are valid is very helpful to trans kids. She also claims that they're hugely sympathetic towards trans adults who simply want to live their lives. Unless they simply want to live their lives going to a bathroom that matches their gender identity, in which case, fuck off, we don't care, apparently. Gender-critical people do not believe that trans people are valid. Just like Magdalene Burns, just like Maya Forstater, and apparently, just like J.K. Rowling, although jury's still out because she's so fucking vague. Rowling also claims to be well-researched and well-informed many times throughout the piece, and I have doubt. I have some doubt. One of the only studies that she cites is this one, Lisa Littman. And this is where I kind of start to suspect J.K. Rowling's intentions with this piece, because this study, oh boy, oh, it's bad. It's bad. This study investigates the supposed phenomenon of rapid onset gender dysphoria, and if you haven't heard of that before, that's because it's not a thing. First of all, the data comes from online surveys taken from parents of trans kids, and not the kids themselves. So, it's already a problem there, because I don't think any one person who, even if they're a parent of a kid with gender dysphoria, can understand gender dysphoria. Like, that's not a thing you, as a non-medical doctor person, can understand. And the websites that these surveys were taken on were inherently biased. There was Fourth Wave Now, self-described as a community of people who question the medicalization of gender-atypical youth. Transgendertrend.com. With a URL like that, need I say more? And youthtranscriticalprofessionals.org, which has a bit more of a unbiased veneer, but also denies the existence of trans people. All of this, in addition to the complete absence of control variables, make this study ridiculously unreliable. It's just so annoying that she even cited it. Like, come on, J.K. Rowling, you're university educated, you should know. She implies the study was criticized because it dared challenge the trans activist narrative, when really it's because it's a terrible fucking study. And because she cites the study, it means that she must believe in its conclusion. Because, as she says sardonically, nobody could ever be persuaded into being trans. And like I said before, GLAAD reached out to her saying that they wanted to have a conversation about trans issues, you know, an opportunity that she could get informed on the topic by an organization that's very informed of the topic, and she declined the offer. It's ironic that she talks about trans kids being in an online echo chamber, because from the people that she cites, she seems to be in a pretty turfy transphobic echo chamber herself. In the end, like I said, I don't think we can give J.K. Rowling the benefit of the doubt or saying that she was misinformed, because she has the means to be informed on this topic. And if she's not informed, that's on her for not seeking out reliable sources. I'm a second-year university student studying English, and I was able to find a shit ton of studies on this. You just need to look at reliable sources. Oh my gosh, it's not that hard. But just one person being transphobic, I mean, it sucks, but it's not like a huge issue. Unless, of course, that person has like a shit ton of Twitter followers and has a huge audience, because she's propagating all these myths and all this fear-mongering about trans people to her huge audience, which misinforms all the cis people and makes the trans people feel like shit. I've read several articles about trans people who were fans of J.K. Rowling and Harry Potter before all of this happened, and honestly, I think you should check them out, because I don't think I could ever fully understand or express to you what trans people might be feeling right now. So I've linked a bunch of them below. And J.K. Rowling doesn't seem to understand what effect her views can have on trans kids. She says things like, the argument of many current trans activists is that if you don't let a gender dysphoric teenager transition, they will kill themselves. And how she was told that she was literally killing trans people with her hate. Yes, Joanne, views like yours are very harmful to the people who follow you, especially the trans people, who are statistically more likely to commit suicide if their community does not accept them for who they are. And a lot of these trans kids saw themselves in the books that you wrote. Don't you want to have a positive effect on the world, J.K. Rowling? Another thing that I really hated about this piece was that sprinkled in between all the, fear-mongering and misinformation, J.K. Rowling would write things like, I know the transition will be a solution for some gender dysphoric people, and because of course trans rights are human rights, and of course trans lives matter, and I respect every trans person's right to live in any way that feels authentic and comfortable to them, because I know that she doesn't actually believe these things. She doesn't believe in a trans person's right to live in however way is authentic and comfortable to them, because she keeps raising her concerns about trans women in women's bathrooms. If she actually believed these things, she would do some research, find some reliable information, instead of spreading all this fucking misinformation. So J.K. Rowling, if not a full-blown TERF, has some TERF sympathies, but I'm sure most of you guys knew that before you clicked on this video. Also, if you're still here, hi, thank you for watching this far. This is a very long video. The real question is, what does this mean for her fans? As a pretty avid Harry Potter fan, this is a question that I've been percolating on for several months now, actually. As an English major, I've had to read a fair number of classic novels, and some of them were written by pretty shitty people, but then again, they wrote some banger books, but also, most of them are dead, so they're not profiting off of the books anymore. This is not the case with J.K. Rowling. Unfortunately. I don't advocate violence on this channel. That's sarcasm. Sarcasm. I recently had a conversation with this with a friend of mine, and one of his favorite books is Ender's Game. The author, Orson Scott Card, was against same-sex marriage and takes the stance of love the sin or hate the sin, which is a phrase that makes my blood boil. However, Ender's Game is a beloved novel, and from all accounts, a very good book. I haven't read it, sci-fi isn't really my thing, but I trust my friend's judgment. It's probably a very good book, but the dude who wrote it, shitty guy. So, can we read and enjoy the works of problematic creators? I'm going to, in this specific case, cautiously take the stance that yes, we can. J.K. Rowling has already taken away my respect for her, and the last thing I want is her to take away this book series that I like so much, because fuck that. However, if it makes you uncomfortable to read her books, that is totally valid. But I think that when reading books by problematic authors, or consuming any work by any problematic creator, we must make sure to be critical. For example, this summer I was planning on finishing my Harry Potter reread that I started last summer, and I'm still going to do that, but it's just going to be a little bit less of a nostalgia trip, as it'll be a little bit more critical. Obviously there will be nostalgia involved, not saying I can't enjoy the books anymore, but I will make sure to be critical about the books, because, I mean, J.K. Rowling's transphobic views are not her only problematic views that she has, or things that she's done. And when, in my uni classes, we read books by sexist, homophobic, racist, and anti-Semitic authors, we make sure to keep that in mind as we analyze their works, because when people write things, when people create art, there will always be little hints of their prejudices in there. Basically what I'm saying is, enjoy what you want, but make sure to keep a critical perspective. Even if you don't know that the creator is problematic, there might still be things that you could criticize within the work. To finish up, I just wanted to show you something that I thought was pretty cool, pointed out by Q Fever on Twitter. In the Deathly Hallows, several members of the Order of the Phoenix take Polyjuice potions and they look like Harry. One of these people is Hermione. And when you take Polyjuice potion, it means you transform entirely into the person. So Hermione takes the Polyjuice potion and looks like Harry. J.K. Rowling, throughout the scene, continues to use she/her pronouns with Hermione, even though Hermione has a male body at the time. So deep down, J.K. Rowling does understand the concept. Maybe she just doesn't know that she knows, and maybe she just needs to get a little bit more informed. I just wanted to leave you with that. Thank you for watching. I'll see y'all later. Bye.